Hello, welcome to my house. Enter freely and of your own free will. Quote Dracula, whenever this book was written. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley. Today we're going to be discussing the iconic, the one and only Dracula by Bram Stoker. So I'd never read or watched any adaptation of Dracula before, and I ended up really loving this. I loved all of the gothic elements. I loved the story, I loved the characters. So let's get into non-spoilers, shall we? Okay, so this book is written as a series of diary entries and letters between many of the characters. And at first that really threw me off. I wasn't quite sure what to do with the formatting because you end up having to piece a lot of things together yourself. The narrative doesn't necessarily give everything to you, which as a reader I kind of liked, but it took me a while to get used to that. This book follows Jonathan Harker, who is a young lawyer. He travels from England to Transylvania to help Count Dracula purchase a house in his area. And once he gets there, he realizes that not only is everything not what it seems, but also Dracula himself is uber creepy. And it all goes downhill from there. This book has everything. It has vampires, it has damsels in distress, it has a mystery, it has someone who eats flies, it has a crapload of garlic, it has a dramatic showdown, and it has a Texan who loves his guns. Like, it's great. This is great. I had no idea what to expect going into this, and I absolutely loved it. Some of the big themes that I really loved that were covered in this book are the conflicts between good and evil. There's definitely a Christian element to this, just because of the time period that it was written, and that was really interesting to watch play out. There's also a battle between mythology and modern wisdom, and the battle between which one of those eventually defeats Dracula. And then there's also a lot of commentary on the role of women and what kind of role they should be playing in society. This was written at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, and there's a definite switch between how active a role women take in the characters of Mina and Lucy, and that's really interesting to watch play out. Things that I absolutely loved and adored about this book are the wide range of characters. I feel like I've been trapped in reading young adult novels for not trapped. I mean, I'm choosing to read these books, but there's a definite trend in the new young adult books that I've been reading about kind of focusing in on 2 or 3 or 4 main characters, and this book opens up the doors. There's a lot of characters, they're all doing a lot of things, and I really enjoyed how wide the range of characters is. That may not be something that you care about if you read a lot of books that have a lot of characters that are doing a lot of different things. I also really loved the gothic elements. I forget every time, like anytime I take a significant break from reading Gothic literature, I forget how much I love it. I love the dark, chilling settings of castles and manors and creepy cemeteries at night, all of which you find in Dracula. I also love that the main characters are tormented. They spend a lot of time questioning their own decisions. They feel much more realistic to me because they're not end all be all. So I love the characters of Gothic literature. I love the mystery and the magic and trying to uncover all of that, trying to figure out what's going on, how to solve it, how to fix it, how to take care of it. I love that you're afraid that the characters might actually fail. I love Gothic literature. I think that's definitely something that I had forgotten about myself, and I'm so glad that I read this so that I could rediscover that. This is also a thriller novel, but it's a very low impact, low suspense thriller novel, I think, in comparison to the novels and thrillers that we often see in our day and age. So if you're not huge on thrillers, this is probably a really good starting place, just because, I tabbed all of the places where I felt afraid. So orange is everywhere that I felt afraid. And there's really not that many, there's a couple scenes where I was like, ooh, this is kind of scary. But for the most part, I think culture and TV shows have really desensitized me. So I don't know, it wasn't super scary or disturbing. Not as much as it could be. I think if this was written today, it would be a lot scarier, but written in the time period that it was, I'm sure it was thrilling and suspenseful and shockful. Shockful? Is that a word? Can we say that? Shockful. New word. Go, guys. And then also, for this being a classic, a work of classic, this really wasn't a hard read. There's definitely a curve of getting used to how the author writes, but once you get beyond that curve, the first 40 or 50 pages, I think, then it really picks up and it's fine. So for being a classic, it's not a bad read. Okay. Things that I didn't love about this book, like I already mentioned, it took me a while to get used to the writing style. The narrative feels a little bit jerky, especially when you jump from Jonathan Harkin's perspective to his wife. You go back for 4 to 5 months back in time, just based on the letters that you're getting, and I didn't like that. I didn't appreciate that. I think a reread, I would like it a lot more just because I'm expecting it and I'm getting used to it. But to go from being in Dracula's castle to a kind of domestic scene, I felt definitely bored up until things started to move again. But I think that was more a product of me not understanding the writing style. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what I think of a reread. I just make up words all the time. I don't know if you've noticed that about me, but someday I'm going to make a dictionary of all the things that I've made up. This will be very entertaining. Next, the treatment of women in this book is not my favorite. I 100% understand that this was written in the 1890s and in the early 1900s, so the first 10 years of the 1900s, and women had a very different place and role in society, and I absolutely understand that, but that doesn't mean that I like it or that I think it's okay, and I don't have to like it or appreciate it. So there are definitely a lot of things in the treatment of women that I am not okay with, and I had a hard time setting that aside in my head, and we'll get into that in the spoilers. So if you are a feminist, you might find that difficult. You'll probably find that difficult to read in a lot of classics. So, I was able to put it aside and enjoy the narrative itself, but that was something that did bother me. And then the last thing, this isn't necessarily something that bothered me, but I know that it has bothered other people whose videos I've watched. They're disappointed about how little page space Dracula actually takes up. We have a couple confrontations with Dracula, but mostly what he's doing kind of takes place off page. It's not Lord of the Rings where you don't ever see Sauron until he's dead. It's not that kind of off the page. So you do see Dracula and we do encounter him, but he doesn't, for the novel being named after him, he doesn't show up very much in his own story. So I was surprised by that. It didn't bother me, but I know that it does bother some people. So heads up. Okay, we are now moving into spoilers, and you have about 5 seconds to switch to a new video if you don't want to listen to spoilers about Dracula. So you have been warned. Okay, so spoilers. Things that I loved. There are these 3 bros who spend a lot of time hunting and fishing together, and I don't think it's a coincidence that all 3 of them choose to propose to Mina on the same day. I think it's hysterical. I think it's a really funny entrance into Lucy and her character. I think they kind of all were just like, well, we all like this girl. Let's see who she says yes to. And I feel like there's a bet going on behind the scenes. We don't learn that from the narrative, but that's what I'm guessing happened. Oh, I do want to talk a little bit about Renford. He's the patient who is insane that Dr. Stewart is treating. And after Lucy rejects his offer of marriage, he throws himself into his work, which, that's fine. Oftentimes when we are rejected by love, we want to, throw ourselves into something to get over that. But he doesn't actually do a whole lot to cure Renford, I feel like. Granted, psychological analysis is very different now than it was in the early 1900s. But the things that he does, he kind of does them in a way to provoke Renford and kind of to see, how will he react? He almost takes on a godlike persona. He's like, well, maybe I'll grant him a cat for his experiments. Maybe I won't. We'll just see how it happens. He's not at least in the narrative, the way I read it, it doesn't seem like to me that he's actually trying to cure Renford. He's just experimenting and playing with him to see what he does. He just finds him super interesting, and so he's just kind of almost messing with him as he's eating the flies and then the spiders and then the birds. And I think that makes him crazier. And I mean, Renford himself was already a great target to become a minion of Dracula. But maybe if Dr. Stewart had treated Renford differently and better, he might not have been. And I don't think we can argue that Dr. Stewart's treatment of Renford would have changed him completely. But maybe if Dr. Stewart had treated him as more human and instead of just trying to provoke him to see what he would do, Renford, there might have been more of a building of trust between the two of them, and perhaps Mina would not have been turned into a vampire at the end and been bitten, if there was more of a relationship of trust built there. So I do think that is a problem from Dr. Stewart. I think Dr. Stewart is culpable for that point. I feel so split on the doctors on this novel, because Dr. Van Helsing and Dr. Stewart, I really want to like them. I really do. But Van Helsing, when he's handing out all of his tools, he's handing out the holy wafers, he's handing out the crucifix, all these items that will help protect against vampires. But he doesn't hand them out to any of the women. Like he does hand it to Lucy, but only after she has been bitten, and like that's fine. But before they go to attack Dracula himself, he doesn't give anything to Lucy, which I don't know if that's arrogance on Van Helsing's part, because he's like, oh, our plan is fail-proof, like you don't need to be protected because we got it, or if it's just you don't like what it just didn't cross his mind to give Lucy or Mina something to help with, even though Mina herself is the one that transcribes all of the records and puts the records together so that they can figure out a cohesive plan. Mina also is the one that puts all of she memorizes when all the trains leave. She's the one that helps them figure out when they can get to Transylvania on time, when they can get anywhere on time. Like, Mina is their knowledge base, and without her knowledge, there is no ability for them to act, and I consider her very crucial to the novel, and Van Helsing it never occurs to him to give her anything to protect herself, and that bothers me a little bit, and part of me wonders if that's one of the reasons why Van Helsing travels with Mina to Transylvania, because he feels bad for having forgotten that, and therefore feels responsible for trying to help keep her safe, and he wants to be the one to deal with any fallout from that because he feels like it's his responsibility. I don't know how to read that. He's a complicated character in my mind. He definitely is very hesitant to hand out wisdom to anybody, and that bothers me, that he wants to hold everything so close, and he just seems very proud and very vain, and I don't know that I would like him if I actually met him and were working with him. Even though he's got a lot of knowledge, and it's his knowledge that defeats Dracula in the end, and like we have to be grateful for him for that, but also he's not like, he is a hero, but he's a complicated hero, and I just want to acknowledge that. Same with Dr. Stewart. I think there could have been better treatment of Renford in that scene. Also, fun fact, they named a disease after Renford, the character in Dracula. They called it Renfield syndrome, which is an obsession with drinking one's own blood or the blood of animals or other humans. So we named a disease after a made-up character from Bram Stoker, and I thought that was really funny. I don't know how many diseases are named after fictional characters. I don't know. I thought that was really funny. Anyway, back to Van Helsing. There is a great documentary discussion of the entire book of Dracula, and it's very short. It's 2 to 3 minute videos on every chapter, and then themes and analyses that I'll link down below. I really loved watching that. I also think it's super interesting that what saves the day is myths of the past instead of current technology. Like, Van Helsing and Dr. Stewart are both trained doctors who they met in the war, and I'm not sure what war they're talking about. But they met in war, I think, because they're old war buddies. And like they've been trained in medical procedures of the day. Like they've read studies. They're very, very much men of science. And the thing that ends up saving the day is mythology and past legends and lore. And I think that's a really interesting way that went, because a lot of times, especially nowadays, thrillers end up solving a lot of problems with current knowledge that we have. Like, the person who wins is the person with the superior knowledge base. And I think it's really interesting that this novel instead chose to win the day by looking at past lore and past myth, and that's what saved the day. In a sense, it's very similar to Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, because again, what saves the day is old myth and old lore. I don't know, I'm trying to think of other books where there's a battle between the technology versus the myth, and the myth wins. Usually that's more of a magical thing, but I can't think of any, and that's probably a more lack on my part on the books that I read more than a slam on other books. So I don't know, I really appreciated a theme that focused more on the fact that sometimes modern medicine falls short in some areas, and we have to resort to other ideas and emotions and feelings. I think that's a valuable point to raise, and I enjoyed watching that play out. I feel like we kind of were left on a big cliffhanger with the final showdown of Dracula. I know from watching other people's videos that some people were really let down by the ending of Dracula, because he wakes up, but then he doesn't like throw anybody, he doesn't rip any limbs off, he's just and then he's dead. So there's not really a showdown. The showdown is trying to catch him, and then once they do stake him, his face gets filled with relief and he dies, which is such a cliffhanger to me, because the same thing happened to Lucy, and she looked at peace after they had finally actually truly killed her, and so part of the questioning at the end is, how much is Dracula responsible for his own actions? If being undead and bitten by a vampire makes you a monster, then how much can we hold Dracula responsible for his actions? And has he been deeply tormented this whole entire time? Like, it gives Dracula I don't know if we call it a redemption arc, because I think a redemption arc is when you go from the bottom up, but his is definitely a falling down. So it's not a redemption arc, but the arc of his character, it's definitely left open. There's definitely room to look at that and go, wow, Dracula may not have been as evil as we thought, which I really love. I would love to know more of what Bram Stoker felt Dracula's backstory was. And I think part of the reason why there's not a big showdown is that there wanted to be a focus on this Dracula who is relieved by the fact that he is no longer a villain and a vampire, and he is relieved by that. Anyway, I really liked the ending. I had no idea what to expect, so I appreciated that. I'm sure that there are adaptions of movies where they do amp up the suspense, and I am definitely interested to watch the movies and see how they compare to the book. Also, if you would like more Victorian Gothic literature, I have a whole video that I'll link up here in the cards that you can go watch and enjoy. Anyway, I think that's all I have. If you haven't read Dracula, highly recommend. A lot of people say the first 200 pages are super slow, but also I feel like that's just the way classics work, is that they tend to work a little bit slower. There's a little bit of a slower pace, but that's simply because books didn't need to grab you by the throat and keep your attention from your phone. So anyway, that's super random and off topic, but I will talk to you all later. Bye.